just trying to close one thing. All right. So with all this talk, I'm going to spend quite a bit of time tonight talking about kind of financial aspects of kingdom work. But one of the most important things to keep in mind through all of this stuff is it has got to stay in perspective. In this Philippians, and Paul's words here to the Philippians church is imperative for us to keep centered on what this is all about. And the reason you're going to hear me keep re-emphasizing this point is because it can become a slippery slope. If our motives are not oriented in the right direction, then we can be out of God's will. We can be out of the Lord's will in what we're doing and what we're praying and what we're trying to build. And if we're out of the Lord's will, we're in our flesh's will. And so our whole premise here is that our prayers that the Lord's will be done. And so the context of all that we talk about tonight has to be this Philippians 3:8 passage. Everything else is worthless, as Paul says, when compared with the infinite value of knowing Christ, period. Okay? For his sake, I've discarded everything else, counting it all as garbage so that I could gain Christ. None of this stuff that we're talking about tonight matters if we don't have this verse really burned into our brains and into our hearts and into our language and into our narrative, our explanation, our motives. This has got to be our centering cry here. Showing up on my screen, it looks like some people are in the waiting room. Are you able to see them? And so are you all with me? Do you understand that this verse has to be front and center to all that we're going to talk about tonight? So I need to hear you guys' feedback on this.
Yes.
And you appreciate that if we lose sight of this verse, how everything else can go down a slippery slope. Is it clear why this verse has to stay central?
Yes.
And believe me, there's no shame here. This is all about community and us learning and growing together. So if there's anybody that has any question, like, okay, Harold, Dr. Arnold, why are you emphasizing this so much? Raise your hand, say something here, so that we can explain it. Because I don't even want to go on if this isn't. I don't want to move on until everybody understands the centrality of all of this stuff. We're going to talk about some real estate stuff. We're going to talk about some investment stuff in general. We're going to have a little more financial leaning tonight, a lot more financial leaning tonight than we did last month. And that's intentional. But I have to wait until I'm sure that you guys get the gravity of this verse. So, because everything else after this will be, it has to be held in that context. And I don't want to, go ahead.
Do you mind explaining that verse for us?
Sure. So this is Paul, right? This is the Apostle Paul. He's writing to the Philippian church, right? And we understand, those of us who, if we do much study of scripture, we understand that Paul had a pretty fascinating track record, and going from a persecutor of the church to being a stalwart of the early church. And in matter of fact, he became the voice to the Gentile church, right? So, which is us, right? So before that, it was all Jew. You look at every writer of the New Testament is Jewish, except one. That's this guy. That's the Apostle Paul. And so it's important to understand who the author is, right? And what his track record is. And what that guy is saying is nothing matters. It's relative, nothing matters. Nothing's not even close to mattering aside from knowing Christ. Nothing else matters. It's not on the same plane. Yes, it's important stuff, it's kingdom stuff, but when you look at it relative to the impact, the importance of who Christ is, what the message of Christ is, then none of it's all worthless. I mean, we're going to talk about worth tonight. We're going to talk about net worth, right? But keeping in mind, that is worthless. It doesn't matter whether, I mean, I'm using this moniker $1 million marriage. It doesn't matter if we lose sight of what Christ's call to us is. And if we are not in the position of, for his sake, discarding everything else, counting all that stuff as garbage so that you can gain Christ. If that's the vantage point, that's the stance that we have to take as people of the way, kingdom people, that Christ first and anything else is a far distant second. Period. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Thank you for asking that question. You were the only one brave enough to. All right. So with that said, now I think we understand, what does it mean to invest your life? And I shared some thoughts last month about that. I'm not going to spend a ton of time recapping the stuff from last month, but this is one of the slides that I shared with you last month to have this kind of bilateral understanding. Two things, because I feel that it all boils down, and whichever of the domains, relational, psychological, or whether we talk about spiritual, theological, or whether we talk about financial, this bilateral principle of acquisition and stewardship is central, and you can apply it everywhere. It's about the commitment to acquiring, and it's about the commitment to stewarding. Acquiring, that's getting, obtaining. Steward, that is being the manager of, okay? And then the other central point that I emphasized last month is this whole notion of in service to what? To your master. So then it became the operative question of who's your master, right? And so we as Christians, we've been socialized to say Christ, of course, is our master. But then the question is, let's look at your thing. Let's look at your checkbook. Let's have a little camera in your bedroom. Let's see what's on your phone and your computer screen. If you want to talk about who is your master, what is your master, it isn't about what you say. It's not about what any of us say. It's about who we are, what we show, what we do. Okay, that's what it tells us who one's master is, or that's what tells you who your master is. Acquisition, stewardship. I talked about that last month. One of the things I'm just going to briefly recap, because I know there's some of you on here that were not here last year. I'll talk about Dahlia and me. Our kind of investor profile, just to give you a sense, as I talk about the different things tonight, they come from the perspective of some experience, right? So from a spirit, I have three areas that I'm looking at this notion of our investor profile. There's a spiritual perspective, and this year has been a tremendous year of growth for Dahlia and me in this area. Under the umbrella of spiritual disciplines, and discipline has been the theme of Eusebia this year. There's been a tremendous amount of growth for Dahlia and me in this area, especially with regard to the practice of spiritual disciplines, like a daily practice, or at least weekday, daily of Bible reading, study, meditation, scripture memorization, prayer kind of stuff. We elevated that to another level, and it really has transformed our marriage, even after 33 years. And I don't say that lightly. And if you ever have any questions for me about any of that, you want to hear more of that, then just talk to me and I'm glad to share it. And the other thing that has been a significant advance for me personally has been doing Sabbath this year. It's something that I've been slapped on the hand for a number of years about it, and I've never taken it seriously enough. And this year I took it seriously, and it's really, along with everything else, it's been transformative. And maybe one day we can talk more about that and what that's meant in my life and meant for my marriage. What it looks like for us is fasting weekly as well. What it looks like for us is just the ministry stuff that we do with Eusebia, especially, and which includes this 40 under 40 stuff. And of course, I should say, of course, there's books and stuff that I've written before, marriage books and otherwise, and marriage and just different types of writing things. All of that is what I talk about as our spiritual portfolio, our relational portfolio, us as a couple, 33 years of marriage to Dahlia. And as I touched on, a lot of growth. It's about marriage accountability, having other couples, that we hold ourselves accountable to and meeting with them regularly. That's something that's part of our practice. It's about mentoring other couples. That's something that we do. And it's about with our adult children, having calls with them weekly. That's all part of that relational portfolio. And then when we talk about financial portfolio, we are what are called accredited investors, as defined by the Securities and Exchange Commission. And, we can go into, or you can look up what accredited investment is about, but it has to do with either the amount you make annually in your job, or it has to do with your net worth. And for us, we are real estate investors. And I'm going to talk some more with you guys about that. For us, we have 10 units in 3 different states. We do a little bit of flipping. We're doing one right now, a ground up development with a partner. And then there's equities, and so I'm going to touch on some of that tonight as well. We do have multiple streams of income between our W-2s. There's 2 of those, and then our rental income stuff. And I don't count capital gain stuff as from stock stuff as income per se, but that's happening. And then, as I was saying earlier, this notion of credit score is so important. And so, we're in a good position with that. Let's just say this week when I went in to buy, I had to buy a car because my wife's car got totaled. And so we had to go, and, the car dealer is like, well, if doing all these qualifiers, if your score. And so anyway, they eventually pull up my credit score and their whole demeanor changed. It's hilarious. But anyway. So when I talk about kingdom investment and kingdom wealth, this is the perspective that I'm coming from. Also, last month, what I talked about is I used 2 parables, and I'm not going to dwell on them again. I'm just wanting to remind you what that Philippians passage that we were talking about earlier. This supports what Paul is talking about there. Jesus is doing. We talk about the parable of the talents and the parable of the minas, and when we look at these, we have to remember these are parables that Jesus told. They're parables, they're stories. He's making them up as illustrations of what? Of the kingdom. He's getting ready to go into Jerusalem. He's getting ready to die soon. And he's using these parables to tell about what it is like to be in the kingdom. And he gives this notion, this story of, how of putting resources in your hands, in the master going away. He's foreshadowing his own going away. And he's saying that he's putting stuff in our hands, in their hands. And he's saying that that's according to their abilities. And so last month, I elaborated more on that. But one of the key things I highlighted here in red that stays central to me, everyone who has more will more be given, and he will have an abundance. It's just interesting that Jesus keys in on that, and he does it twice. When he tells the other parable, he says the exact same thing. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. So this notion, when I was talking earlier about this bilateral thing of acquisition and stewardship, that's what Jesus is talking about here. He's talking about stewardship. And so it's there, and it's when he does a totally different instance, he does the parable of 10 minas, he goes the exact same thing. He uses the exact same, almost practically the exact same words. Everyone who has, more will be given, but from the one who is not, even what he has will be taken away, right? So Keep that in the back of your mind. And Sean, there's another one that's up on my screen about letting into the room. So why are we talking about invest your life? God's work in this world is done through you, through me, those of us who invest their lives in this kingdom stuff. And by this financial freedom that we're really espousing and talking about with you guys, we're doing that because we believe, we know that this is how we can maximize the work of the kingdom, maximize your kingdom focus. When you aren't encumbered by all of the things that come with trying to make ends meet, when you are not encumbered there and you have the freedom, financial freedom, the creative freedom, the cognitive freedom, when you have that freedom to really lean in and seek the Lord and let your creativity thrive, and then it's the sky's the limit about what he can do through you. Why is that so key? Well, because the Lord has that line of, he has this plan worked out, and the goal is to get you and me in a position where we can be the actors in the plan, where we can execute that, and understanding that our lives and those of us who are in our circle are going to be transformed by that investment. And ultimately our joy is it lives right there when we can maximize that. Okay. So I'm pushing through these parts quickly because this is really just a recap of last month. But I do another Philippians passage, and this passage is central and is actually a central passage for Eusebia for next year, because we're going to be talking thematically about desire next year. And so I love this passage in Philippians 2:13. For God is working in you. Why? He's working in you, giving you the desire. God giving you the desire. God giving you the desire. But he's not just giving you the desire, he's giving you the power to fulfill that desire. You need the desire, that needs to be God-given, but you need the power in order to fulfill that desire. But all of this is about what pleases him. That's the key. And so last month I talked about these different 5 aspects of kingdom investment. And I went into detail for each of those. So you can go and look at the recording and stuff for last month, and you can see the explication of these 5 things. I can't recap those things right now, but all of this was to kind of set up, that's where we were last year. And it builds right into what I wanted, not last month, and it builds right into where I want to go tonight. But are there any burning questions, anything confusing before we kind of dive into our focus for tonight? Okay, I'm assuming that we're good. So I'm using this rubric of $1 Million Marriage tonight. And I need to find this source. I got this from another person, and I was like, this is so informative, but I need to go and actually find the source myself. But he quoted it as a Bureau of Labor and Statistics thing. And if this is true, this is like disturbing. So according to the BLS, on average, today's 65-year-olds fall into the following categories of financial dependence. 63% being dependent, that's today's 65 plus. Social Security or either family and friends dependent. That's 2/3, almost 2/3 of 65 plus is either really dependent for financial freedom, financial independence on Social Security or needing family and friend support. Almost 2/3. That should bug us. There, you can see that 1%. That sliver there, those are people we would call wealthy, 5 million plus. You can see the 3% there. Those are folks who 65 plus who are still working. You can see that 4% there, they've done well too. Adequate savings, 1 to 2 million in that range. And then you can see the other ones that never even, they're dead, they're gone. It's an interesting statistic, but the big thing here is about that 63%. And if we looked at certain ethnic communities, including the African American community, the numbers might actually skew even more disturbingly, honestly. When we talk about how to be $1 million marriage, I want to throw out 3 ideas. One is spiritual affluence. Now, all this kind of ties to stuff that we talked about last month: spiritual affluence, relational affluence, financial affluence. Spiritual affluence, I'm calling net will, our net will. Relational affluence, network. Net meaning what's left. Okay, and you'll see what I mean as I get into that. Financial affluence, net worth. Net will, network, net worth. This is what the kingdom wealth is about. It's about assets and liabilities. And the way we are used to thinking about assets and liabilities, I want to challenge some of the way you think about that. And I'll use some support for that. But this is an important point for you really to kind of lean in. So don't run, get a glass of water right now. This notion of assets and liabilities is really key. What we own is what we typically think of as assets. What we owe is what we typically think about as liabilities. But what I want to submit for your consideration is that's too narrow definitions, okay? What I really want is for us to use Robert Kiyosaki's definition of assets and liabilities. And I've added to it a little bit the word spiritually in there to make it have broader application. But what he presupposes here is that there's this difference between an asset and a liability, and he's admonishing us by assets. His notion is that rich people acquire assets, poor and middle class people acquire liabilities, but think they're assets. And that's so interesting. And so I added to that the word spirituality, because I think the same thing applies. That spiritually poor people will focus on assets, and not just material assets, but other types as well. Spiritually poor middle class people acquire liabilities and think they're assets. And I'm going to go more into this, because then the question is, well, what is he suggesting is an asset then? So my question, how well do you know your assets? So what we would typically think, we look at things like housing, we look at cars, we look at shoes. When you think about a house, do you think of that as an asset? Yes or no? Let me hear your voices.
Yep.
Think of that as, I heard one yes. So there a few yeses.
Yes.
Gotcha. We think of it as an asset. With your car, do you think of that as an asset?
No.
No.
Yes.
Okay. I heard one yes. And then I have sneakers there. Do you think of that as an asset?
Yes.
It depends.
Not typically.
You
Yeah.
can put the sneakers now.
The sneakers depends. Yeah. So tell me, when you're answering yes and no here, what are you basing that on? How are you determining whether something is an asset or not?
Based on its functional use in my life.
Functional use. Okay, got it. Any other? How do others make that determination?
I think it
Appreciable or, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was going to say appreciable or depreciable asset or item.
You said, I heard all I heard was depreciable asset. Say that
Something
again.
that either appreciates or depreciates in value. So that's what I was thinking of as asset.
Yes, very good. So if it depreciates in value, can it be an asset?
Yes, you just may have to move it before it depreciates too much.
What do you mean move it?
Either sell it or trade it, get the most out of it before it starts to depreciate.
Got you. Okay, great comments here. So, and this is part of what I want to challenge some of the thinking on, all right? So typically with houses, we think of houses as assets, and the and the notion there is, well, they increase in value over time. And so they're appreciating assets. So you can build up equity as you pay off your, principal, so forth. So we typically think of houses as assets. Kiyosaki would challenge that and say your primary residence is not an asset. With cars, there's some mixed response. Some people think of cars as an asset, but call them depreciating assets. So Kiyosaki would say your car is not an asset. And then, so the thing here is we live in an economy now where, Kiyosaki's definition really is around making whether this thing brings you income. Does it make you money? So here's the thing. If you use Kiyosaki's definition, does your house put money in your pocket? Yes or no?
No.
Okay, very good. Most of our houses do not put money in our pocket. Does your car put money in your pocket?
No.
Typically, no. So if we think about Kiyosaki's definition, then we might look at these things and be like, these things are not assets. Even though in our original things you own and things you owe definition, we would think of these as assets. But the thing is, we live in a culture now, and I'm going to go into more explicit examples, but we live in a culture where your house absolutely can put money in your pocket. And I know from personal experience because I'm doing it. And so when we think about housing, we can't just think about our primary residence. We can think about other investment properties, right? And whether those houses are putting money in our pockets. And all of us can understand, if you have some investment houses, how those things can be putting money in your pocket, right? But even your primary residence, if you don't have that, you can do, that's this term that's very common now. It's called house hacking, and that means you have, like, so I have, and even where we live right now, this house I'm in right now, my wife and I live in one house. But there's two houses on this property. It's our property. It's 1.2 acres, and there's another house on the property. I have tenants in that other house. Those tenants pay $2,200 of my $2,300 mortgage. You following that? My mortgage is $2,300 on the whole thing, and my tenants pay $2,200 to live in that back house. You following? So then, is my house, even my primary residence, is it an asset? Yes, it's putting money in my pocket, right? And guess what's going to happen? You think that house is going to be $2,200 forever to rent? No, it's $2,200 right now. They just got in this house. They haven't been there a year yet. The rent on that house is going to go up. Eventually, that house is going to be paying more than my mortgage, right? I'm going to have a net gain to live in my own house. So somebody else is paying for my primary residence. Somebody else is, and we're going to get into the rental stuff, but somebody else is obviously paying those rentals as well. But there's other things like Airbnb and VRBO, things like that, where you can use to, rent out rooms and things of that sort to turn your house. It's about the mindset. Even we just bought a new car. Every fiber of my being wants to figure out how to use Turo.com to turn that car into an asset where it makes me money. If you're not familiar with Turo, go look it up. Turo.com. Essentially, people will rent your car. And I've listened to people who are making on average between $500 and $1,000 a month renting out their car. Right. And you live in COVID times where you may not be using your car as much as you used to. There's ways that your car could be bringing in income. And then, of course, there's some people who use their car for Uber and Lyft and stuff like that, side hustles to bring in income, right? And then there's things even like these shoes, right? It's crazy. These people, there are people that have businesses reselling Jordans and stuff like that and making money. So that's the whole point of this, is the mindset to generate net positive income. We have to change our mindset. And part of that, of knowing our assets, is looking in the mirror. Because it's not just about those things out there. The question is, are you personally, and are you as a marriage, a couple, are you an asset? Meaning, do you create wealth, or are you a consumer? Spiritually, relationally, financially, some of us are not assets as far as what we produce. Some of us are so much consumer, and we do not produce a net. So, and because we don't produce net, we will never create wealth. It won't happen. So I'm going to come back to the financial stuff. I want to just step through a few of the other things before I get there. Because as I said, this stuff has to be front and central to the whole worldview. Spiritual affluence, net will, that's about the ability to delay our own gratification, our own fleshly gratification, resisting short-term things, short-term gains, in order to meet long-term goals. And when I say long-term here, I'm talking about goals that our spirit is directing us towards, God-directed goals. And it's our capacity to override kind of unwanted, flesh-motivated thoughts, feelings, impulses, right? So if we can look at our will, and we can figure out how we can delay our flesh's gratification of our flesh, if we can figure out how to resist short-term temptations, if we can have longer-term goals that are God-directed, and that is the net will, I'm calling it. And a spiritual asset, what is a spiritual asset? Well, I'm calling it anything you possess that transforms you to the image of Christ. Anything that transforms you to the image of Christ, I'm calling an asset. Anything that deforms you from the image of Christ, that keeps you from moving towards being in the image of Christ, that is a liability spiritually. Our thing is, we have to maximize what our spiritual assets are. We have to minimize what our spiritual liabilities are. One of the key things to Jerry Bridges, I love the way, so I know this is a long quote here, but hopefully the point is clear. In his book, The Pursuit of Holiness, he makes this point here. Look, when God originally created man, there was here was the balance. The reason, the emotions, the will, they all work in perfect harmony. Reason kind of leads the way, because that helps us understand the will of God. The will then consents to God's will, right? It's subservient to God's will. And then the emotions delight in doing what God's will. That's the way we were created to be. But the enemy distorted that. And with that sin that's in the world, these things don't work in harmony anymore. They work at cross purposes to one another, and they work at cross purposes to God. The will then becomes stubborn. The will becomes rebellious. The will does not want to consent to that which it knows, because we're believers. So we know, we have a sense of the things that are the will of God, but our will won't consent to those things. Or more commonly, we will allow our emotions to get the upper hand, and those emotions then draw us away from both reason and from will to obey God. So in other words, emotions, will, reason, created to work in harmony, but the way we're living, they're in disharmony. How do we maximize this stuff spiritually? It's stuff that has been so transformative. As I said earlier, for me this year, this stuff around the spiritual disciplines, this stuff around devotionals, and things like grace, having homes of grace, being people who are grateful and have gratitude, having the joy of the Lord. I mean, things like that, those are spiritual assets. So we have to, in order to maximize those kind of things, we have to consecrate our life to the Lord's service. We have to reserve time daily for individual prayer, Bible reading, meditation. We have to be grateful, show our gratitude to the Lord, show our gratitude to others for what we have. Stop focusing on so much on what we lack, what we don't have, practicing humility, practicing gracefulness, seeking the joy of the Lord, because that's our strength. Remembering the Sabbath, something I said I haven't done very well, that I'm trying to do better now. All of these things, but the hurriedness, the busyness of our lives pull us away. So that those things of the reason, the emotions, and the will, that busyness is what creates that disharmony. We have to try to, but these things that we're talking about, the disciplines, devotion, those things help us recalibrate, bring those things back into harmony. So again, with that, as I started out talking about Philippians, and that notion that Paul is admonishing us there, this is what it is. We have to maximize our spiritual growth. But the other thing I want to talk about is relational affluence and network. And what I call that is this just cumulative amount of equity that we build in with one another. I mean, that's what this forum tonight is about. This is about network. This is about relational building. And so a relational asset, person, interaction that challenges you to be a better version of God's design for you. A liability, any person, any interaction that distances you from the person that God designed you to be. Anything that does that is a liability. Any person, any interaction that pushes you to be a better version of God's design for you, that's the aspiration. That's the goal. Those are the people you want in your life. And what does that look like? I mean, it means, and certainly in marriage is one of the prime ways of this, striving to understand before seeking to be understood, striving to see things from your spouse's point of view, being transparent and authentic, non-threatening, striving for ways to sacrifice your preference in order to serve your spouse, maintaining a learning posture, maintaining a teachable spirit, sharing of your time, talent, encouragement, praise, practicing transparency with others, living, I call it the 40-40-20 in a way, but what that is 40% of the time, husband, you get your way. 40% of the time, wife, you get your way. And then 20% of the time is flex, that it can go either way, right? So there's more of an egalitarian feel to your home. Model, share testimony with other couples, and encouraging and empowering other couples. I mean, all of that stuff is about building that relationality. Why am I saying all this? It's important because before I get to this financial stuff, if we can't attend to those spiritual strategies that I talked about a minute ago, and if we cannot build this relational dynamo here for you, with you and your wife, you're never gonna maximize the next thing that we're talking about, which is the financial thing. Because, and I know from my own experience, it's a totally different dynamic when you trust one another, when you believe that your spouse cares about your opinion, and that your spouse is actually hearing from the Lord, and that you are seeking the Lord together. It changes your whole dynamic from this is what I said, this is what I know, this is what I believe. It's a different dynamic. So we're getting ready to go into this financial stuff, but if we don't attend to this other stuff, we're not going to prioritize God's will. We just aren't. We might say we will, but we won't.
Harold, there's a question in the chat from, I think it's Anuli Daramola.
Yeah, go ahead. What's the question?
It says spiritual asset portion 2 slides back. Can you please elaborate on what you mean when you say remember the Sabbath? Also, are you referring to Sunday service or the true Sabbath?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean when you say the true Sabbath. Well, what I'm referring to, well, obviously it's a commandment, but beyond that, it's what is the practice of Sabbath? It's the intent is that you put away the things that of your pursuits of in the natural, and that you reserve that time for just spending with the Lord. It's a time of rest from work, right? And so work can look different for different people, but that idea of separating and from what our daily grind is and having that period. And sometimes for some, the Sabbath is a whole day, for some, or multiple days. For some, the Sabbath is a number of hours in a day, but having a space where you say, God, I'm putting away all this stuff that I'm thinking about pursuing all the time, and I'm making space so I can just listen to you. That's what that's Sabbath. And I'm not really interested in any kind of doctrinal. I'm not trying to make any kind of doctrinal type of controversy about when is Sabbath or any of that. But there's plenty of literature, especially in the spiritual disciplines literature, about how to, silence, solitude, other things like that we could incorporate into a Sabbath practice. But I think the simplest way to think about it is, where is that time, that space where you just get away from what your normal routine is of what occupies your mind and your practice. Does that make sense? Does that help?
Yes, sir, it did. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for the question. Did I miss any other questions, Sean?
No, you're good.
Okay. I know I'm going fast through that because but again, I want to get to the financial piece here. And then of course I said I'll have time. So where does the time go? It's crazy. So financial affluence. So I'm not going to hit my goal of getting through all of this stuff before by 9. But I'm going to stay on and get it and entertain questions here as well. If you have to leave, thank you for being here. Everything will be on the recording, but I'm going to do my best here. But I needed to set it up before I spend so much time on this, because I just have to. We cannot get this distorted. We have to have that spiritual piece and relational piece up front and focus every time we do this, because the adversary, if we don't, the adversary is going to use it and get in there and try to make it something that it's not. And so I have to spend the time to make sure that is prioritized. So when we talk about financial affluence here, I'm sure most of you have heard the term net worth. This is not my definition of net worth. The total wealth of an individual, company, household, take into account all their financial assets and liabilities. So I'm using here Kiyosaki's definitions that I told you earlier about asset. His definition: anything that you possess that puts money in your pocket, anything you possess that takes money out of your pocket. Now, some of you might say, who in the world is Robert Kiyosaki? Why does he keep referring to him? I don't have time to go into who Kiyosaki is. Look him up. He's a prolific figure, especially for his rich dad, poor dad stuff. But there's, as far as I know, he does not come from a faith-based perspective. But his principles here align with what I'm sharing tonight. So that idea, when we talk about financial affluence and net worth, it's about maximizing those assets. It's about minimizing those liabilities. And there's a ton of different things here that I talk about in strategies for financial maximization. And I'm going to step through them quickly, but I'm going to do so quickly because I want to get to this next real estate example with you guys, because I think that'll help concretize some of the stuff that I'm talking about. But here are just things that we have. Each of these 10 things are things that we had that I would encourage you to go down the checklist yourself and say, how is that something we're doing? Is that something we could be doing? Maximizing your W-2 income. In other words, bringing in more income from your job. What about, are you maximizing your retirement plan contribution? Most of us don't maximize it, but aspirationally maximizing your retirement plan contribution, making sure you get your, whatever your max employer matching funds are. I think most of our many employers these days have some level of matching, and to not get that is really just leaving money on the table, and it's almost ridiculous to do that. And increasing your savings rate. That is a huge thing that we don't talk about enough. And so, for me, when I'm teaching, my kids are adults now. When I'm talking to my kids, I'm talking about them striving to the point where they have a savings rate of 50%, but minimally aiming for a 30% savings rate. That basically means that there's a 30% gap between what you make and what you spend. And then that's your savings rate. And then investing that difference. All the stuff I'm going to share with you, if you don't have a gap between a savings rate, if you don't have a savings rate, there's no way you're going to do any of the stuff that I'm talking about here tonight. So you have to do that. So how do you do that? Well, you either make more money or you reduce your consumption. It's one of those things. It's not magic. It's pretty straightforward. You got to change your savings rate. Turning your primary residence into an asset. That's what we were talking about a little bit earlier. Are there ways that you could do that, or get a property where you could? Maybe the primary residence you have right now can't. Maybe you sell that primary residence and get one where you can. I mean, we sold a 3,000 plus square foot house after our kids were gone in order to buy properties where we could have other people live there to pay us. Right. In our primary before, that would not have worked because my wife personally wasn't going to have people living in the same house with her. So that wasn't going to happen, Rahisha. You know what I'm saying, right? And then, of course, there's acquiring investment real estate. I'm going to give you an example of that on our next slide. So using that kind of stuff, long-term stock market investing stuff, especially I like using index funds. Why? Minimizing fees over the long term. Sean can tell you more about this than me. They take a big bite out of your long-term return. So that's why I like index funds. Generating additional side income through this gig economy. Even if you can't, you say, well, Harold, I can't take my W-2 up any higher anytime soon, but there are side things you can do. My wife and I have done things like on Amazon, being sellers on Amazon, others have, use eBay and things of that sort. Dog sitting. There's even apps like Rover. If you're into animals, you can like dog sit and make money. Like you got to be thinking creatively how you can bring more income into the house. Even loaning money to trusted businesses. That's one of the things that I do using self-directed IRA stuff. I definitely don't have time to go into that tonight, but you can be using your IRA and money that you put aside. You can use that and do loans and stuff on it. And starting a small business, of course, and Sean's more of an expert on that than me. And developing a marketable product and brand. Some of you are out there trying to do those kind of things. So all of those things can help maximize your financial position. Cash, stocks, mutual funds, ETFs, bonds, real estate, small business income. I'm still trying to figure out what that cryptocurrency is all about. But it's there because I know some people's they're already there. I'm not quite there with crypto yet. I'm not totally a believer yet, but a lot of people are, especially younger people. So I'm going to give an example. These things are kind of the backdrop when we talk about financial wealth building. There's some combination of those things, those 10 that you have to be doing. If you're not doing those things, you're not wealth building, period. And that savings rate is so vital here. Let me pause for a minute before I get into this specific real estate example I want to show you. Is there any pressing question on this that feels that you really are, that I lost you? I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you pretty quickly, but is there any pressing question?
I have a question.
Yes.
Out of the 10 things, what do you think? What do you think are like? How many of those do you think is important to kind of gravitate towards? Like, would you say, hey, if you're doing kind of 3 or 4 of these, then that's great. You're in good shape. Or
Well,
is
I
it
mean,
you need to go to do all 10?
no, I mean, you don't. I can say for me personally, I'm doing most of these. My wife and I are doing most of these. So it is definitely not, it's not undoable. I don't want anybody to look at these and feel like, oh God, that's nobody can be doing. No, there's plenty of people who are doing all 10 of these. And you can too, probably, if you can at least work towards doing that. If I had to pick one, I'd probably say 3. Because it all boils down to savings rate. And savings rate could mean by doing the saving, that might mean, okay, well, how am I going to bring in more money, or how am I going to consume less money, or consume less things? But it boils all of this stuff in the example I'm getting ready to show you. It all presupposes a savings rate. And that savings rate, the more you have there, savings rate wise, the more flexibility and options that you have. It's all about the savings rate. And of course, I'm looking on the natural side. I'm not looking at the point where that God has there's a synergistic and transcendent facet that overlays all of this stuff, right? But what I believe is that in the natural sense, we do our part. And I believe when we do our part with what we talked about earlier, as far as the financial and the relational and the spiritual stuff in order, I believe the Lord will orchestrate things in our lives that really push these things forward. But I believe it's our responsibility to do our part. So Danielle, I would say number 3 is so many of these things tie into number 3. You do a lot of these things to increase your savings rate. Hadley's, did you have a question?
Yes, I had a question specifically about number 10. And I think that you have done this successfully as being somebody who writes books, has a product, and kind of I don't know how to ask the question. I think that there has been, especially in ministry circles, where the person becomes the product and the person becomes the brand, and that has been a detriment to them in terms of ministry, where it's almost like they're prostituting the gift that God has given them. And so my question becomes, if you're an artist, if you're a writer, if you are somebody who does ministry, but also can get financial gain from that, how do you draw the line so that you're not
Yeah.
I don't know how to say it the right way.
No, I mean, I get it, Daniel. I mean, it's what I've been saying all tonight. It's what did I start this off with? What verse that I spent too much time. I mean, not too much, but more time than I probably should have. I was talking about Philippians, right?
3:8, yeah.
Right. I keep coming back to that thing. And that's the answer to your question. There's no magic to it. It's all about our decision to prioritize the things of God. It's all about that. And he knows our heart. And as we continue to do these things, these spiritual practices that I pointed out earlier, those things are to keep our hearts aligned with God's will. If we allow those things, just like that Jerry Bridges quote, if we allow those things to get in disharmony, that is when what you're talking about is gonna happen. And it's just a matter of time, because our pride, what is it? The lust of the flesh, right? It's the lust of the eye and the pride of life. Those things are gonna go. I mean, that's what the devil is gonna work on. And so if we don't keep that priority on those spiritual matters, and like Paul said, that those things are garbage, if we lose the perspective of Christ being central, there's no magic to this. It's like if we lose sight of that, everything, all bets are off. You're absolutely right. And we have to keep it central. Brian? I'm sorry.
My question kind of relates to Danielle's as well. It might be the same answer, but
I'm not sure how to word this either, but say you have the spiritual stuff down pat, you have your financial stuff down pat, or you're working towards it and you want to treat yourself. Ladies know what I'm talking about. You see a nice bag or some nice shoes and you want to buy it. But is it wrong to buy a very pricey shoe or bag in spiritual, like your spirituality in general? Like, is it wrong? God
No, that's a great question. And I think that's a different question than what Daniel posed. And no, it's not wrong. Of course it's not wrong. But what's wrong is when you don't have a goal, you aren't prioritized. Remember that I started off this thing talking about acquisition and stewardship, right? It's what you acquire and get and how you steward it. Now, so the question then back to you, imagine Jesus's parable and the Jesus coming back to you and asking you to give an account of what he put in your hand, right? What you don't want to do is show him all your Gucci bags, right? I mean, because that probably wouldn't go over well with him, because remember, he's about the kingdom work. But there's nothing wrong with having your Gucci bag. No, get your Gucci bag when you're in the position to do that. Right. The problem is that we're getting Gucci bags when we're not in a position to do that. And we're using credit to get the Gucci bag, which when we pay over time, and then we pay actually double the price of the Gucci bag because we did minimum payments on the credit card. That's killing our savings rate. No, there's nothing wrong with those kind of discretionary purchases, but they just have to be kept in in the right context and congruent with our goals that we set together as a couple for where we want to be in 2022. Where are you going to get to? Where's Danielle and Kashif going to get to in 2022? Are you on that goal? You ahead of that goal? Kashif, get your wife the Gucci bag, man. So I'm just saying, but if you're way off the goal, then no, you shouldn't be going to get the Gucci bag. You should be looking at your savings rate. And it's like, we got to tighten this ship up. Does that help?
Yes, very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, I want to give this example here, and those are great questions. And we're going to have hopefully some more Q&A time. I just want to get, and this is our example, and I just want to throw it out to you so you have a sense of what I'm talking about here. So here are 5 houses. These are all our houses, okay? I talked earlier about our primary residence. And there's 2 houses here. Market value 475. The debt on this is 370. I'm talking thousands here, right? 370,000 equity. So what's the equity? That's the difference between the market value and the debt, right? So the equity there is 105,000 on our primary. That's 105,000. We just bought this house in 2019, late 2019. And so that equity, that's just over a year, a little over a year. Right? You're talking about 105,000 in equity. That's the power of real estate, right? Especially in a crazy market. But then you look at PITI is principal, interest, taxes, insurance. So that's our full payment. That's what I was talking about earlier when I said 2,300. We talked about rental income. I talked about the 2,200. We have great tenants here. And in it it's a net negative $100. In other words, what my wife and I pay to live on our 1.2 acres here is $100 a month. Okay, that's our primary residence. Then we have several other properties. You can see here the different, some are singles, some are multifamilies. But you can see the market value, you can see the debt, you can see the equity, you can see the mortgage payments, you can see what the rental income is, you can see the net. So when you go across the bottom in the net, some have big net, some have little net. So one's net 250, another one's netting 1850, another one's netting 700, another one, it's an asterisk beside that one because it's our son, it's a partnership with our son, and our son is basically living in one unit and not paying anything. So even with him not paying anything, it's still a net positive, right? And when I say partner, it's he's the majority owner in the property. And so but when you look at all of that stuff together, 10 units, the market value of those is 1.7 million. The equity in those is 568,000. The cash flow monthly is, as of today, 2765. So if you look, do you expect, all things being equal, would you expect those numbers to be higher next year as far as what the market value and the equity are and what the cash flow is? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Yeah. What about the year after that?
Yep.
So what do you see that all over time, all these things, barring a crash, all these things are going to keep going north, right? So when we talk about being accredited investors, things like that, these are the things that are feeding into that. When you look at the equity here, that feeds into that. But are there any, do you all follow the power of that, the power of those numbers? Is that clear? Or I know I went through it fast, but do you see how I derived at what I'm showing you here?
Yes.
Yes.
So
Quick
this
question, Dr. Harold.
Yes.
Your primary residence, is that forced equity appreciation? Did you make any improvements on that primary residence?
We did do some improvements. I mean, the other house, we fully gutted it, totally new. So that's something that required capital. Where did the capital come from? Well, remember savings rate that I talked about? That's where that came. We did some stuff in this main house. This house was from 1940. So there was a number of things to do here. And like I meant, the other house was a total gut. So yes, a lot of that is forced appreciation. Some of that is forced appreciation.
Harold, there's a question from the Mortons. When did you start investing in real estate?
2017. So within, 4 years, this is what we've done. Now, let me tell you about the sacrifice that comes along with this. Because we went into all of these houses that you see, with every one of these, the one in New Jersey, the last one, our son went into it. So same principle applies. We went into all of these as owner occupants. What does that mean? And what that means is that my wife had to be willing to move that number of times. Now, the first one, the house that's in Maryland, that was our house back when Sean and we lived near each other years ago. So we've had that house since 1994. No, 91. So we've had that house a long time, but we were owner occupants then. All these other houses are owner occupants. Why is that important? Because when you're an owner occupant, the bank allows you to put down less money. Usually you're going to put down somewhere between 3.5% and 5%. As opposed to when you buy it as an investment property and you have to put in 20% or 25%, depending on the bank, especially when you talk multifamily, it's often 25%. So what does that mean? How many of you are willing to move every year to buy a house, to go into another house? So it's important for me to emphasize that, because I don't want you to be under the impression, it just happened. No, sometimes there's sacrifices and stuff that have to be made. It wasn't easy, right? Now, my wife has given me my wife's like, I'm not moving again, Harold. And I don't blame her. I mean, she's paid her dues, right? But we built something by our willingness to make that sacrifice. And now we can be in a position where we can acquire some other properties where we don't have to move into. We can purchase them as investors. Okay, does that make sense? Clear? One of the things that I want to put out there for our consideration, especially for us as African Americans, there is a difference between creating financial wealth. You got to think about, do you earn money or do you make money? And you might have thought those were the same thing. And I want to challenge that. I want to say that most of us Christian couples know how to earn money, and we do not at all really know how to make money. And I'm going to give you an example of that. But if you just look at the definitions here, earning money, when we go to our jobs, it's time for labor. Time, that's what they call it, time for labor, time for your time, and you get money for it. So that comes at a cost of your time. So to gain or get a return for your labor or service, nothing wrong with that. Hey, I believe in earning. But that's different than making. When you look at the definition of making money, to produce, to cause to exist or happen, to bring about, to create it, to produce it, not just for transfer, for it to exchange to be put in your hand. There's a difference. I want to show you an example here of making money. Okay. So, and this is, I mean, this is essentially kind of one, we've done this. Couple owns a home worth 350,000. All right. That's the market value of the house, 350,000. They have an unpaid balance of 150,000, right? Okay. So in other words, still owe the mortgage company 150,000, but the value of the house is 350. So that's $200,000 worth of equity. Couple gets approved for a home equity line of credit for 140,000. How they do that? Well, because when you go to the bank, and Sean's a banker, he can verify this. You go to the bank, you tell them you want to take out a HELOC, and they're going to look at the property. They're going to see it's worth $350. They're going to give you something like 70% of that, somewhere around 75% of that. They'll be willing to give you at our interest rate, prime plus something, maybe two. I think the one we have right now, prime plus 2%. Then the couple uses that HELOC to go and purchase a distressed real estate property. So, but they're going to do it as an investment property. So they don't want to move into it like we did, like an investment property. But to do that, got to put down 20%. And so on that, that's $40,000 from that HELOC. That HELOC, you got $140,000 HELOC. You're using $40,000 to do that. You're then spending money. You got to because it's distress, so you got to rehab it. So you're going to spend $30,000 there to rehab it. You've now up to $70,000 that you've used in that HELOC. Remember, it's approved for $140,000. Now, so your total cash into this deal is $70,000, right? That's the $40,000 that you needed for the purchase, and then that's the $30,000 you needed for the rehab. Everybody with me so far? All right. So with that rehab, though, net after repair, and this goes to the question I think Danielle asked me about the forced equity. With the rehab, the after repair value is $300,000 in this example, right? So then if the couple sells the house for $310,000, now if they sell it for $310,000, there's realtors commissions and all of that stuff and settlement costs and all that stuff that comes out. So let's just estimate that they got a net $275,000 from that after all the settlement stuff is handled. So then that $275,000, they go and they pay off the mortgage and they pay off the HELOC that they got on there, right? A $160,000 was the left on the mortgage. Remember, because they bought the property, or they paid off the $160,000 plus the 72. It's up to 70. That's the HELOC plus interest that had accrued on the HELOC. So they pay off that $232,000. And then, but that leaves a $43,000 profit. That's a pretty significant cash on cash return. And then the question is, where did that money come from? Where did that $43,000 come from? Because is it gone from your original house that you got the HELOC on? Is that money gone from that house? No. Like so where would you say that money came from? The $43,000. What do you think, if you all followed my example here?
The flip.
Yeah, it's a flip. But where did it come from? Where'd the money come from?
The difference between the net from the flip and the total cost of everything.
Yeah, right, exactly. So, but you all are describing the process. Yes, and you're absolutely right. But what I'm asking you is, where did the money come from? Like
the bank. It came from the bank.
So, but that's a net. Is that money you owe anybody?
No.
No. When you say it came, normally when money comes from a bank, you're thinking they bank making me a loan. They're getting something. This is net. I mean, other than capital gains, that's a different taxes. That's a different thing. But that money, when I'm talking about the difference between earning money and making money, this is an example I'm using to say this is making money. You created this money.
The deal made you the money.
The deal made you the money. Exactly. The deal made you the money. The money wasn't, it wasn't, and then it was because of the deal. Excellent way that was phrased. And so if we can change our thinking from just we earn money, because money, the challenge with earning, and believe me, I'm an earner. I've been one 30 plus years. So I know a lot about earning money across 2 different careers. But the exchanging time for money it puts limitations on you that making money doesn't. And you guys 40 under 40, you guys are young too. And if you can understand these principles and embrace them at a younger age, these are things that I'm getting into in my late 50s. Okay. And so you guys can really leverage this in a way that is beyond what I'm going to be able to do. But let me pause there. Do you see the significance of this example? Does it make sense for you?
Yes,
I know
it
I
does
went
to
through
me.
it quickly. What does this say? Tell me what this says to you in your own words, not going through everything, but what does this mean?
It's saying you seized an opportunity where you saw that something was at a value, that if you just spent the time to, bring it up to code or bring it up to market value, that you can make a profit out of it after everything is said and done.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So it's a way of looking at things, right, Brian? It's a way of looking at the world around you, looking the way of opportunities around you, that it isn't just about the boss man putting some, being willing to give you a raise finally that you haven't gotten in several years because of a pandemic or whatever, right? And so, but it's looking at the world with an eye to how can I create? What can I make? Let me give another example that's not real estate. Maybe some of you are like, Harold, stop focusing so much on real estate. Fine, I will. Here's the stock market, another example. And there's a thing here called the 4% rule. You can look up the 4% rule. It's a well-known term in financial independence circles. But the basic implication of this thing is you get a certain level, you can live off of 4% of your the 4% of the funds that you've accumulated, and essentially at least over a 30 plus year period, you would never run out of money. And they use Machiavellian models and things to show that, but basically that's the 4% rule, that you will have quote unquote a kind of inexhaustible, and it's not technically inexhaustible, but over a 30 plus year period, that you wouldn't run out of funds. There's almost no probability that you would run out of funds if you only did that, given the historical returns of the market. So how do you calculate this number? So if you prudently project your retired monthly spend rate, let's say you're going to spend $6,000 a month, just making up that number. You annualize that and say, so that would add up to 72,000. So you multiply that annual spend rate by 25, that calculates how much money you need to be financially independent. In this case, so if you said, we can live on $6,000 a month, what that would mean is you need 1.8 million in the market that's generating, standard historical returns. And then you can withdraw 4%, which is the 6,000 a month, and your money would never run out. You're essentially, if you can live, if your spend rate is $6,000 a month or less, you are technically financially independent at that point. You don't need any other income from your W-2 or anything else to live your lifestyle, spending up to $6,000 a month. Now, if you can't get your spending down to 6,000, then you'll just use that same multiplier for whatever. It just means that you got to have a bigger nest egg, right? So 1.8 million will get you to 6,000. But if you need more than 6,000, and then of course, once you get to a certain point, presumably if Social Security is still around, there's other things that you can have to complement that, 6,000. That's just if you want that out of your investment savings. Does that make, I know I'm throwing so much, I feel like I'm throwing so much stuff at you guys. But what I want you to understand is it's mindset. So if you can think, find that you don't have to be dependent on the way the systems of this world. You don't have to be dependent on that. You can do these things. Again, I spent all that time talking about spiritual priorities, relational priorities. But if you can do those things and then leverage those to maximize your financial options, then you are going to be in a position where you have more freedom to do the things that you feel God has you here to do, instead of needing to spend 90% of the energy that you have doing the stuff that just to bring a paycheck in, because that's what you have been taught to do. Let me pause there, because my next slide is really kind of a wrap up. So what now slide, but do you follow? Are there questions about either the real estate example or the stock market example? In our cases, for me, my wife and I, both of these are what we're focusing on. The real estate stuff is what we're doing. You saw our example. The stock market stuff and is what we're doing as well in trying to get our, get our nest egg to that point where we can live off of that money in perpetuity. What questions do you have?
Harold, there's one in the chat by Joseph Brito. Did you hire a property management company or do you manage all these properties personally?
Both. I have a property manager for some and I'm self-managed some. It just depends on where the property is located. The ones right now that are local to me, I self-manage for now anyway. I have been self-managing them.
And Brian has his hand up as well.
Yes, Brian.
For the SDIRA, for those companies, is there a site or something that they're listed on, or is it just folks that you know personally?
For the self-directed IRA?
Yeah.
Well, you have to use certain providers for those. One that I use in Philly is called Camaplan, but there's another one that I've been hearing good things about called American IRA.
No, not the SDIRA, but how you found the trusted investors or developers. Is there a website you go to, or?
Oh, no. You just have to, create relationships.
You just gotta know. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
people I work, that I've come to know. One of that we're doing a ground up development house in Philly, right outside of Brewery Town right now. For those who know Philly, and so yeah, it's a person that he and I have been friends, and okay. He's more of the, I'm more of the money, frankly, in this deal.
Okay, no worries. I didn't know if there was a portal or resource for individuals looking that could be accessible. But okay.
No, not really that I'm aware of. A lot of it goes on through RIAs with the real estate investment clubs, stuff like that, where you get to know people and build relationships there. And then obviously you want to have high trust in people before you go put your money there. Right. So be very discerning before you do that.
Harold, two more questions. One from Kashif and Danielle. Does the house example change if you use hard money lender or cash out refinance?
No, not really. I mean, hard money, it doesn't matter. I just gave that example using a HELOC, but it's the same principle. I mean, obviously with hard money, the rate is higher. And so that takes some of your profit, but we're using hard money on this is some of my money. And then we're bringing in a hard money guy because I don't have enough money to do the full construction. So we're using hard money, and, the rate is a little higher with that. So that eats some of the profit, but it's better to have a deal. It's better to have less of a good deal rather than have nothing. So we'll do the hard money.
And Pastor Parker asked, what's your occupancy rate for your rental properties?
100% always. Well, technically now it's not 100 because I'm looking, we're just finishing up a place getting ready that is getting listed this week. So, but yeah, we're generally at 100%, but I'm small. I mean, we're small, our largest units are triplexes. So right now prayerfully we'll get bigger, but so we're only talking about 3 units in any given property.
Harold, can I add a couple points to what you shared? Sure. One of the things, and Harold touched on all of the things that are critical as far as from a spiritual standpoint, also make sure that you and your spouse are equally yoked risk-wise, because that also becomes a concern, because sometimes one member or one individual wants to take more risk and the other doesn't. And so you have to be very careful that you're balancing that and what you're comfortable with. Anytime you invest, you assume risk. Do not ever think that when you invest in anything, that there is no risk that you're taking, okay? And make sure that you understand the risk. I like the fact that Harold talked about the savings rate. I always tell people before you start any investment, savings is not sexy, but it is the critical thing to have, because if you do not have cash flow, you do not have cash to ride out downturns in anything, whether it's stocks, real estate, small business, you will sell when it's not convenient for you to sell. So you always start with making sure you have that emergency fund and everything else. And then you decide what you want to do. As Harold said, you could do all of them. I know a couple that, they're Harold and our age, and they're worth about 4 million, but they've never strayed from their 401k and investing heavily in the stock market. They're comfortable with that. They don't want to do anything else. They don't want to, try too many other things, and that works for them. So they are maxing out their 401ks. They've done everything to maximize their savings. So you want to sit down and make sure that you understand the risk with each of the items. I will tell you, of those three, small business is the riskiest. I was a small business lender. 80% of small businesses fail within the first 5 years. So you have to understand risk and make sure that both of you are comfortable. And the one thing my wife and I always established, whenever I invested or did anything, I never did anything that could put at jeopardy our primary residence or our level of income. That was our agreement. I could only invest whereby if I lost that investment, it would not jeopardize. And she was comfortable with that. It's like, do what you have to, but don't do anything that would jeopardize where we live and our level of living. And so just make sure that you have an agreement. Got a couple questions up here, Harold. Tasha has her hand up.
Yeah, and I'm coming to Tasha. I just want to follow up on Sean's excellent point there. But let me say, what makes a huge difference in that level of trust and getting equally yoked, as he said, is those first two things that we talked about tonight. That spiritual and relational affluence play a huge role in what that trust factor is going to look like with that. That was one of the reasons that I was emphasizing that too. So Tasha, yes, question.
Hey, I just had a question. This is her husband. I just had a question about investing in your personal small business. What is the safest way, or without taking too much of a risk, what's the best way to go about investing in your personal small business?
If you don't mind, Harold, I'll take that one.
No, I was going to say, that's your territory,
Yeah.
Sean.
When you say the safest, anytime you do a small business, it's the riskiest of the three, just because, again, unlike stocks or in mutual funds, as Harold mentioned, you have diversification. And I'll make it just a quick plug for mutual funds and ETFs. They're the safest because you're diversified. You can invest in 500 companies all at once. But I would say that the safest way, and what I recommended to clients as a small business lender, is if you can keep your day job and do it as a side hustle until you get it to the point where it is generating enough income that you can step away. If you can't, you're taking a bigger risk. I never did any businesses. Harold knows this. I always did them as side hustles. I was not in a position with 2 kids, saving for college, 529s, mortgages to step away. Well, I did one time when I got fired, but that's separate. Got let go and downsizing. But most of the time I did them as side hustles because, one, I did not want to take that step out there. That doesn't mean it was right or wrong. As a banker, I have a conservative streak. So I would say if you can do your business part-time and grow the income to the point where you're past first those 3 to 5 years and the business is stable, and then you can step off of it. Also look at things that people don't consider, such as healthcare and so forth. So let's say you're stepping off. Is your wife working, and does she carry the healthcare and other things? Those all are factors that you have to play. But if you can do it part-time and build it up, it also makes it easier when you ultimately need to borrow. Here's a rule that you don't tell your banker I told you this. If you can, borrow before you quit your job. Don't borrow after you've quit your job and doing the business full time, because the job will be considered a source of cash flow. It'll be easier to borrow a working capital line than if you quit today. 6 months later, you realize I need $100,000 line for the business. It would have been easier if you were doing the business part-time, had full-time income to qualify for that line. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. So it's not like really bad to, if I have to go get a bit like a small business loan, not for a huge amount of money, just some startup money. That's not a bad idea, correct?
No, it's not a bad idea. Most people, if they don't have the capital themselves, but again, if you look and if you send Harold your information, I have a thing I call the investment pyramid. Make sure you've got the savings and the 401k, that you're doing those before you go and borrow other money, because you want to have a source of repayment, because sometimes it takes 6 months, a year to break even on a small business. And you want to make sure that you have the cash flow to cover that small business while it's growing, and you don't want to do anything to damage your credit by not being able to pay. That's where a lot of small businesses, even some that are successful, they in that startup phase, they can't pay their personal credit, they damage their credit. And then when the business is, even though it's now making $1 million, 800,000, and it's bankable, their credit is not, and a lender still won't lend to you, even if the business is profitable, but your credit is trashed.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Joseph.
Yes, Eli. I have a quick question for both Pastor Sean and Dr. Harold. Do you guys have like an outline or some kind of spreadsheet that you guys go over with if you have like you review financial goals for the following year that you guys can send?
Yeah, I have a spreadsheet that I send to folks where you list out your goals and you say, okay, what is the order in which, and then you have your net worth statement, what your assets and what your income is. It's kind of like think of a spreadsheet with 3 tabs: goals, income statement, and balance sheet with your net worth, and then kind of looking at that to see how they all flow together for you to accomplish what you want.
Okay, cool. May I have that?
Oh yeah, I got you. I got your email. I'll shoot that to you.
Okay, thank you.
So how are you guys doing? I know we have gone even a little past our 9:30 time. Let me just say, and if there are other questions, I can stay on. But so what now I'm saying? I'm saying we're here at the end of 2021. What I say is step 1 here is because it's the highest priority. Choose at least one of those spiritual assets we talked about and determine as a couple that you'll cultivate that in 2022. Make that a priority. Choose at least one of those relational assets and make your determination that you'll cultivate that in 2022. When you do that, I believe God smiles on that. And then it doesn't mean that everything in the financial bucket is going to somehow be magically work out, but I do believe it gets its favor. And so I would say prioritize those things, but then I'd also say calculate your net worth. Everybody on this call at the drop of a hat should be able to tell me, if you so chose, what your net worth. You should know what your net worth is. So you need to calculate, and there's tools out there that you can do it. I personally use Personal Capital. There's others like mint.com, but there's plenty of tools. Calculate your net worth so you know what it is, and then you know what you're aiming for. And so when we talk about $1 million marriage, that means your marriage is at least worth $1 million. All right. So I'm aiming for multi-million. And then set that net worth goal for 2022. So know where you are now before the end of the year. Set for next year where you're going to be this time next year. Sit together as a couple and do that after you've done step 1 and step 2. And then calculate your FI number. That number, it doesn't mean that you're going to want to leave, be financially independent. Just calculate the number so that you know kind of, if we got here, we're independent of our W-2s. Just calculate it to see what the number is. Some of you are never going to want to step away from your job. Some of you are. And then one of the things that I'm planning on next month and starting to do next year, and you guys can let me know if you think this would be helpful, is to do like what I'm calling a 40 under 40 portfolio review. And so what I'm thinking about is, I have to talk to Sean about it too, but I'm thinking about my wife and I investing in something and then bringing that thing in front of you guys every month and just watching it over the course of the year and it being part of our discussion. So that's something that you can look forward to with us as well. So the key takeaways there is choose that spiritual asset that you're going to focus on that on a relational asset, calculate your net worth, set your net goal for 2022, calculate your FI, and then make sure to tune in to us with us every year, every month, next month, as we go through this stuff together. Just a reminder, and I see there's a hand up, I think, Sean, but this, what we're doing here with you, 40 Under 40 is part of Eusebia. Our goal is to really empower you millennial couples through these monthly type of things, and reminding, our annual live event will be in Baltimore in October 13th to 16th. We would love to have you guys there, and we'll have, some 40 Under 40 specific things happening there as well. But we want you to think of this as your community. So just help us know how we do that better. Tasha or husband, did you have a final question you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I think that might have been from before, Harold. I don't know.
Okay. I thought I saw it.
Just one other thing, Harold. For those of you who wanted the spreadsheet, I put my email, sac1002@yahoo in the chat. Just shoot me an email and I'll send you that spreadsheet. And the last thing Harold hasn't mentioned, one of the things we make available for Plus members at Eusebia is that I'll sit down with you and just go over it. There's no obligation and so forth. So if you want the spreadsheet, I'll send that to you. And if you want me just to sit down and look at your goals and so forth, like Harold mentioned, you guys have the most powerful asset or powerful thing in your favor, which is time. A small amount invested consistently over time grows to a large amount. So if you want it, my email's in there, just shoot it to me. I'll forward you the spreadsheet. And it's just a nice way to just kind of get started. You'll calculate your net worth, you'll look at your sources of income, and then you can sit down, and it's a good weekend thing to sit down with your spouse and say, what are our priorities? What's the number one thing? What's the number two thing? What's the number three thing? What are our goals, short, medium, and long term? And what are we doing financially to achieve those goals over time? And Dr. Parker, I saw your question there. Once Harold wraps up, if you don't mind, I'll stay on a second. I'll answer that question. He asked, what is the reason that 80% of small businesses fail within the first 3 to 5 years? So,
thank you, sir.
No problem.
We appreciate you guys. I hope you guys, was this helpful? Was this informative for you guys?
Yes, very.
I hope it was, and
extremely. Thank you so much.
Our pleasure. And we want to have, let us know kind of how to, you guys asked me to come back for a part 2, and I did my best to put some stuff out there for your consideration. But let us know, even looking ahead, what's going to be helpful for you guys in this. And of course, let us know about questions. I know there's a lot of stuff. We'll make the recording available, but I know it's a lot of stuff out there. So consider us a resource for you, Sean and myself, and Crystal as well, for you as you work to build those things. Let us know what you decide on as those spiritual goal that you're going to work on, and relational goal. And if there are things that we can help give some clarity to as far as the financial stuff as well. But I hope those examples that I gave let you see what's possible in a relatively short period of time. So be encouraged.
Yes, and a newly asked a question, how to get access to part 1?
Yeah, I sent out I don't know if you were on the mailing list at that point, because I think I added you guys late. So I'll just send me an email to eusebia1000@gmail.com, and I'll make sure to get it back out to you. Okay. All right, I'm going to close up there, but I will stay on too if anybody has any questions for me. Thank you guys for being with us tonight. Appreciate you, and God bless, and Merry Christmas. Remember, Jesus is the reason for the season. Okay. Let me close out in prayer. Lord, we thank you, Father, for just being here with us tonight. I thank you for all the couples that are represented here, Lord God. We just thank you for your banner being over us, Lord God. We submit all this stuff to you, Lord God. Just work our hearts, Lord God, so that our motives all point to you, and our inclination, our spirit, all are directed towards you, Lord God. And that even as we talk about this financial stuff, that we count it as garbage, as Paul said, if we are not in right relationship for you. So what that means, Lord, is to form our hearts in the image of Christ, Lord God, that we can be pleasing unto you, Lord God. We ask that you take our resources and do with them what you will. Help us to be great stewards for what you put in our hands. So one day, Lord God, when you return, you will look at us, Lord God, and say that you're well pleased. That's our desire. Lord God, bless us through this holiday season. We just pray for prosperity. We pray for joyfulness, Lord God, and celebratory homes. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
God bless you guys.
Amen. Thank you.
God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. I'll hang out here for a little bit.
So Pastor Parker, to answer your question, and this is just
Yes,
based
sir.
on my experience. I can't find you hard and fast numbers because especially entrepreneurship, but I'd say the first reason that 80% of small businesses fail is that, and this is what hits, unfortunately, African-American business, they're undercapitalized. They start off with insufficient capital to begin with. It's, if you want to go scripturally, before you build a house, you want to consider
Didn't count the cost.
count the cost. So unfortunately, most of our businesses and most small business people are undercapitalized. They start on a shoestring. Even if they have a good idea, it may take 6 months to a year to become profitable, but they don't have enough capital. So they run out of capital before they can get to break even. So that's the first thing. The second thing is most don't have a proper business plan or an idea. They may have a specific skill, but being in business, and it entails multiple skills. I'll use a restaurant as an example. I may be a good chef, but I don't understand marketing. I don't understand finance. And if I don't have good people around me with those skills, I may be a great chef, but I run the business into the ground because I don't know how to manage people. So the diversity of skills in running a business, most of the time somebody may be good at one thing, but they're not good at the other aspects of it. And that's what ultimately ends up killing it. Somebody could be a good business owner or a good professional to do the work and generate it, but they may be a poor manager, and now they have to manage people. And in doing that, it becomes real that you aren't good at managing people. So your employees leave, you have high turnover, and your business, ultimately fails. Those are the two primary reasons that I've found that most businesses, and then the third one, and like I said, the order of those can shift. Most people say lack of capital, but it's usually just a bad business idea that you didn't really think through in the first place. So
they really didn't do the numbers. When you say they
didn't do the numbers,
you didn't. You either don't know the numbers or know how to do the numbers, or you just didn't do them at all.
Right,
I got you.
Yeah, you just went into it thinking it was easier than it was going to be. You saw somebody else doing it and you didn't realize that they may have had a unique advantage that you didn't appreciate, or the timing. Sometimes if I started a business 12 years ago, there may have been an opportunity to get big at that point that now somebody else. So you're right, you didn't consider all the other factors. It just looked, you heard somebody else was making money doing it, but you really didn't consider all of the factors involved. So I'd say those are the three primary reasons that when I see businesses failing, that they fail at such a high rate. That's why I always say entrepreneurship, it makes more millionaires, but it's also the riskiest of all the three ways to build wealth in this country. 3 of the 4 primary ways to build wealth in this country.
Okay. I was just curious because I hear people throw that term quite a bit, and I was just thinking, well, has anybody ever thought to ask, okay, if it's the riskiest of the 3, what if I'm more prone, or God is leading me this way to go down that road, what are the things that I need to look out for? And you just explained those, because I always thought about the numbers because people don't properly sit down and count the cost, but I wanted to know the other factors there as well. So that was really helpful. Thank you.
No problem. Absolutely.
Dr. Arnold, you still there?
I am. I stayed here in case anybody had any questions for me.
I had some running to do and I missed part of it. I wanted to listen in more on it. I think it was a question that escaped me about the real estate. I appreciate you bringing that out because I see people with a lot of equity sitting in their homes,
Yeah.
and I've been constantly thinking about this, that if the equity doesn't do me any good if I don't have any use for it. And
Yeah.
I've been thinking about that a lot. You know, when people say this is what it's worth, this is the value, it being an asset, and it's like, but how is it an asset to me? Because if it's not putting any more money or creating cash flow for me,
Yeah.
how does it really help? It's just a number on a piece of paper to me.
Right.
So
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that is socialization. I think, hey, it's a good problem to have, right? It's a good problem to
Right.
have to be sitting on a lot of equity in a house, right? So kudos to anybody with that problem. But but I think that's level one. What we're talking about in this group is trying to move couples to level two, right? The next level is, okay, how do we responsibly leverage that in order to build, right? Because that's not what we, especially us as African Americans, have been socialized to think. And so, if anything, we've been socialized the opposite. So, so yeah, I think
trading time for
responsible. We have to be responsible with it and prayerful, obviously, with it. But yeah, how do we then use that in order to take the next step?
Harold, Kashif and Danielle raised their hand.
Yes.
Quick question, Dr. Harold or Sean, whoever chooses to answer. How in terms of like joint account, separate accounts, when you talk about a couple's division of assets, what is the recommended way? Should it be like, hey, you have a joint account into individual accounts or business account? Should you have one pot of money where everything is kind of put in and nobody, it's not his money, her money, is your money? What is the best approach, especially if there's different levels of risk that one partner is comfortable with versus the other partner?
Yeah. I think that's really I think that's the crux of the question, because Sean can give his response. I think I know what Sean's is because I know some of their own journey. But I think it also has to do with the risk profile or risk tolerance of each person. And so Dolly and I have always done everything joint. Everything has been joint for Dolly and me. And if for some reason it isn't joint, the only reason it isn't joint is because she wasn't like today or this weekend. I went and bought this car to replace her car on Friday, and it's just in my name, but that's because Dahlia couldn't get away from her job to go and sign this stuff for me. So it's just in my name, but everything we do is in both of ours, but that's the way we do it. And it's important to say, there's no right or wrong way. There's no more spiritual, less spiritual way. It's all about how do you walk in agreement together, right? And it's about risk. And some people some people put all their bill account, they have a joint bill account, so they both feed that account and they use that account to pay out, and they have their own separate things, and they can maybe do whatever they want with those. That model can work fine. Some people do like we do, where everything's in there together, and there's different type of variation. To me, the main thing is about sitting down in agreement. I think we can get so focused on the wrong thing. The thing is about sitting down on agreement and coming up with that goal is, what that savings rate is, and that savings rate needs to be kind of, for you as a couple, what that savings rate is going to be. And then those decisions that you make about purchases and stuff like that, having agreement about those type of things. But as far as the accounts where the money actually sits, personally, I don't think it matters as long as you guys can stay in agreement. It's really, to me, the agreement is the thing that's important to manage more so than where an account sits.
Yeah, my feeling on it, the main account that you pay bills and so forth, and this is just my opinion on it, that I feel has to be joint. Whenever I've sat and counseled a couple that has separate accounts, there's something else going on. They're like, I have my account, he has her account, and we pay bills separately. There's always an issue. Now, let's say Kashif is running a business and like he's got an LLC with somebody else. Now, yeah, he may be the only person on that account and the partner may be on there. And if you're talking about from a risk standpoint, you may not want to be on the LLC, not so much the account. Being on an account doesn't really give you any risk. But if you don't want to be a member on the LLC so that if things go south, you haven't signed off. But just my experience is when couples have, now, like Dr. Arnold said, now if you two agree, we have a $50 separate account so you can spend something and he doesn't have to know, that's a little different. But every couple I've ever talked to, whenever they sit down and they start talking about, well, he pays this bill and I pay this bill, there are deeper problems. That's just my experience when the money doesn't go in. And I'll speak from my own experience. When my wife and I first got married, she graduated before I did, and she was making more money. And we ran into, she did not want to have a joint account. She did not want that. She was not she had her money, and it took about 2 to 3 years where I finally said, look, you pay the bills. I'll put the money in the account, because she just had a mindset that said, I don't fully, I won't say trust, but she just wasn't going for this joint account thing. But it was something that was in her, and she didn't want to feel like she had to be asking a man what she could do with her money. That's just, there was an issue there. And the way God helped me to overcome it, I said, look, if that's your concern, I'll let you pay the bills. That lasted about a year. She hasn't paid the bill since. Okay. So that's just my only experience, is that when you're talking about the joint account, the joint assets, or the assets, they should be joint. Now, if it's a matter of you're doing something with somebody else and that account is with you and your partner, there's no reason for your husband to be on it if it's a separate partnership. But I just don't see having separate accounts. I have my checking, he has his checking, he pays these bills, I pay those bills. I've yet to see that work when there's not some other issue that somebody's not talking about, or both people are not talking about trust-wise. And it also creates another problem. If something, God forbid, happens to that other person and you're not joined on there, depending on how you have that lined up, they may have trouble getting access to those funds if they're significant.
Absolutely. Dr. Arnold, may I interject something?
Yes, sir.
I would agree with what he said. Pastoring young couples and just pastoring people in general in ministry. Normally, when you have those separate accounts, it is a trust issue, and it needs to be dealt with. Now, if you talk about a difference of who's better at managing and budgeting, I'll give you my own experience. I've always said, and I tell couples, there's no he money, she money, is only we money. And you hit it right on the head, Dr. Arnold, with agreement. Everything, it's got to be the two submitted to one another to agree on how we handle or manage the finances. When we first started out, I was a financial analyst with Allstate. I didn't want to look at a checkbook when I got home because I was looking at Excel spreadsheets all day.
Right.
And so I said, at first I took it on to manage it, but because I was so tired, I was missing stuff and not writing stuff down. And it made Pastor Victoria feel very insecure. So I said, listen, you manage it. You balance the checkbook. You do all of that. I'll tell you what we spent. And then I'll just, on the calendar, sit down and tell you what to pay, because she didn't look at it out in the future. She pay everything out. I said, well, you can pay it this cycle. We'll pay it other bills on the other cycle. So she managed it. But once I left Allstate and I didn't have to look at numbers anymore, I took that back over. So it all depends on who's better at doing something or different parts of the finances. So yeah, just be in agreement with it. But when you got two people, like he said, separate accounts, that causes problems because nobody knows what's going on. The key is communicating about the finances and developing that trust with one another about what to do. We're Pastor Victoria, like you and Dahlia, everything is in one account, and we have a limit to say, okay, if you're going to spend more than this amount on anything, just let me know, because we got a budget and a plan. That's our agreement. If there's any business deals or any investment deals, if any one of us is not comfortable with that, then we don't do it. And we always go in, everyone's free to ask questions about and not get offensive about having questions for clarification. questions is not a doubt thing. It's just, hey, I want to understand because there's something I don't know that's making me feel uneasy about this. So that's just something I want to encourage. He's right. Anytime you have those problems with not a separate account, it don't turn out good. It never does.
Yeah. And Danielle, did you have a question? Mitchell?
I had a question. If you could expound on the consumer, like being a consumer in your marriage, kind of go into a bit more detail about that. Are you consumer or an asset?
Yeah, so I mean, the big thing to mindset shift is producer versus consumer. A consumer mindset is purchase, it's consume, it's purchase, you know, whereas a producer mindset is create. And so consume or create. So what I'm advocating is a creator mindset. I mean, my general thing is I believe we serve the creator with a big C, and we have his DNA. We're made in his image as little c. So I think that we have creation in our DNA. And so I encourage couples to think sometimes we just need enough space in mental, cognitive, or maybe physical space in order to let our creation gifts come to the forefront. So so consumer means that savings rate I talked about, you can't get there because you can't get on the positive side of the balance sheet. You keep spending money. If you're negative every month, and if you're making minimum credit card payments, those are just signs of a consumer home. That's not meant punitively, judgmentally, and that's just a fact. That's just, it is what it is, right? And I believe in using credit. I absolutely believe in using credit and leverage, but using it for my advantage, not for the bank's advantage. So I will use credit for points. You know, I may run up $7,000, $8,000 bills in a given month using credit cards, but you better believe my payment at the end of the month is $7,000 or $8,000. I don't carry balances on those things because I'm not paying them interest. So the thing is to restrict our purchasing and our consuming so that we can have more, we can keep more of what we make, and increasing, that's the savings rate, right? So usually part of our biggest problem is we aren't able to contract our spending so that our savings rate, it's in some cases, it's easier at a certain level, it's easier to improve that savings rate by spending less. At a certain point, you're going to optimize where that balance is for you as a couple. We can't spend, we have kids, you guys have 3 kids, you can't spend less now than you've optimized that already. So now you got to look at the other side about, okay, how do we make more, right, to increase that savings rate, right? But you got to get that spend, that's the thing that is sometimes more in our control first, is reducing our consumption. That side of the thing, that's going to automatically improve your savings rate. So just looking at those telltale signs, credit cards often being one of them, that can tell you whether you're out of whack with the consumption stuff. And that's not being a good steward. That makes sense? Any questions about that? That answered your question, Danielle?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. What is there anything else? I wanted to stay on as long as you guys had questions. Or you guys, is there anything else? Or you had enough of me now?
Thank you, Dr. Harold, for your awesome wisdom.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Say thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
I mean, we're here to try to, I hope you guys feel that we're here about elevating this community. So we appreciate you guys being part of it. And, you know, this is our give to it. So we want your success in this. So whatever we can do to try to help facilitate that. Okay.
Are
You
you
guys,
open,
I'm sorry.
are you open to us asking like specific questions about our personal goals, like through email, or how do you go about doing things like that?
Yeah, sure. Send me an email and I'll copy it with Sean too and Crystal. And we
Okay.
can give you some combined input to it. Sure.
Okay.
And then I'm hoping that we can evolve this group to the point where we can have that, monthly, it can kind of be like where we can come together and talk about these kind of things, right? But a lot of what we're sharing is just mindset kind of stuff and how to think about stuff, right? So that we can all kind of elevate our thinking, how we see things. And then I think the sky's the limit. So yeah, just send me an email.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, well, with that, Merry Christmas, everybody. Hope you guys and
Merry
Santa have a
Christmas.
wonderful and don't forget that this is all about Christ. So don't get all caught up in consumerism stuff. That defeats the point of what we were talking about tonight. Love you all. We'll talk with you soon. God bless.
All right, Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Christmas. Thank you.